I had been hiking alone in the dense forest for 2 days when the feeling first hit me. A subtle shift in the air, a tightening in the silence, like the woods were holding their breath just beyond what the eye could see. And at first, I thought it was just the exhaustion, the endless march through tangled underbrush, twisted roots, and creeping shadows stretching longer as the sun dipped below the pines. But then I noticed the footprints, too perfect, too deliberate to be wild animals. Deep impressions in the soft mud, spaced oddly like someone had been stalking me, and the broken branches, snapped not by chance, but with the quiet purpose of a hunter brushing through the brush. And though I told myself to keep calm, to keep walking, every rustle in the leaves and every distant crack of a twig made my heart race, because I wasn't alone here anymore. Not truly. I slowed, crouched behind a fallen log, and tried to listen through the cool evening air. There it was again. Footsteps, steady, matching my pace but always a few dozen yards behind. Never fast enough to chase but never far enough to escape. A predator's game I was forced into, not by some mythical beast, but by a man, because I'd seen enough tracks before. The unmistakable shape of boots, heavy, tactical, the sole patterned like military issue. I swallowed hard and tried to remind myself that I wasn't just some lost hiker, that I had skills, training in wilderness survival and evasion from years in the military reserves. But this was different. This was not an exercise, not a game. This was real and deadly. And I had no idea why someone would be hunting me in these woods or what they wanted, only that they knew I was here. And as darkness fell, the forest around me transformed from a place of peace to a claustrophobic trap of shadows and unknown dangers. I moved silently, hugging the undergrowth, watching the moonlight sift through branches, casting strange, shifting patterns that made it impossible to tell friend from foe. And every time I stopped to catch my breath, the footsteps stopped too, like the hunter was waiting for me to make a mistake. And once I even glimpsed a dark figure standing motionless behind a large oak. But when I blinked, he vanished, a ghost made flesh, or maybe just the trick of the fading light. I decided to change direction, moving northeast toward a ranger station marked on my map, hoping for a chance at rescue or at least shelter. But the trail wasn't clear. The paths I once marked were erased by wind and rain, and my compass spun erratically as if magnetized by some unnatural force. And when I tried to call for help on my satellite phone, I got only static, as if someone was jamming signals, and the hopelessness pressed in on me heavier than the thick moss underfoot. I slept fitfully, waking several times to the sound of heavy breathing nearby, the snap of twigs underfoot. And once, when I peered into the darkness, I saw a pair of eyes reflecting faintly in the beam of my flashlight. Cold, calculating, unmoving. And that night, I realized this was no random attacker but someone who had been tracking me, studying me, and possibly waiting for the right moment to strike. Over the next 2 days, I survived by keeping to the shadows, moving only under cover of dense foliage or heavy rain, and I found old hunting traps, some freshly set, scattered along my presumed path, which I managed to avoid narrowly. But the fear grew with every step, every breath, because I knew the man was close, following me relentlessly, and he knew the forest better than I ever could. Exhaustion and hunger took their toll. My legs ached, my clothes torn, but the will to live pushed me forward, fueled by desperation and the memories of my family waiting for me miles away. On the third night, I heard voices, low, rough, and speaking a language I barely recognized, coming from a campfire not far off, and I realized my stalker wasn't alone, that a small group must be in these woods, moving like ghosts, blending perfectly with the terrain. And I decided I couldn't outrun them but had to outthink them, so I found a shallow cave, covered the entrance with branches, and hid inside, holding my breath as the footsteps circled, pausing just outside my makeshift refuge, then retreating slowly, like they were searching for me but unwilling to enter. Dawn brought cold light and new hope, and I used the limited supplies I had left to fashion a crude spear, then set traps of my own, tripwires made from vines tied to jagged rocks, and kept moving, following a faint creek downhill that I hoped would lead me to civilization. The forest grew denser, the terrain steeper, and the man's presence never left me. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of him watching from a ridge, his silhouette outlined against the sky, silent and deadly. And the reality of his hunt was undeniable. He wanted to catch me, to end this game, and I could feel the noose tightening. When I finally stumbled out of the woods onto a logging road, bloodied and barely able to stand, I thought my nightmare was over. But the road was empty and eerily silent. No cars, no signs of life, just my ragged breathing and the distant caw of crows. I flagged down a truck driver, an old man with wary eyes who didn't ask questions but gave me water and a lift to the nearest town. And only once we were safely away did I allow myself to collapse, knowing the forest had nearly claimed me, but I had escaped with my life. Though I left the woods behind, the memory lingered, the feeling of being hunted, the cold eyes watching from the shadows, and the knowledge that somewhere out there in the endless trees, the man in the dark was still waiting for his next prey.